We've now created those 3 new parts that we need for the second stage, and I've got those all open in SolidWorks. So we've got the long axle, we've got the right angle beam, and we've got the small bush. I've also got that stage 1 assembly that we made open as well. Now if we look at the instructions, stage 2 is actually a smaller sub-stage that's then added to stage 1 and some more parts are added. So we could just make the entire chopper assembly just as one single assembly, but actually we're going to follow the instructions and we're going to make each of these sub-assemblies in the instructions as a sub-assembly in SolidWorks. This will hopefully just make it a bit easier to understand what's going on and to actually follow the Lego instructions a bit more clearly. So the first thing we need to do is make that small sub-assembly with the right angle beam and the longer axle. Let's go to the right angle beam part. Remember, you can switch between open documents by pressing Ctrl and Tab. From within that part, let's go to File, Make Assembly from Part. So I want to choose the right angle beam 4x2. I'm going to turn on the graphics preview, and then I'm just going to press OK to insert that part fixed to the origin of the assembly. And now if we just spin the assembly round, we can see that the part seems to be lined up correctly, so the default planes are going down the middle of that part. We can now insert that larger axle, the 6 long axle, to this assembly. You can do that by going to Assembly, choosing Insert Components, and then selecting the axle part. And then I'm just going to left click and place it in roughly the right position, about there. Now if you find when your axle part is inserted that it's the smaller grey one, all you need to do is left click on the part in the graphics area, and from this drop down, let's just choose the 6 long axle. So that drop down allows you to select which of the configurations you want to use for that part. Now it's just a case of mating these 2 parts together. So let's zoom in, select a circular face from the axle, and then also select a circular face from the axle hole in the right angle beam. And let's make those concentric. We also don't want the axle to spin around because that wouldn't happen in real life because it's stuck in that cross shape. So instead of adding those parallel mates like we did with the previous stage, what you can do is just expand the mates at the bottom of the part tree. Let's find the latest mate, the only one that we've added, that concentric mate. Just right click on it and then press lock rotation. This just means that that part won't spin around within the hole. So now we've got the axle in the hole, the rotation is locked, and we just need to set the left-right position. Let's move it to roughly the correct place, and then let's expand the axle part. Let's find the plane that's at the middle of the axle, so it's the front plane, and then hold down Control, and then select the corresponding plane from the assembly. So for me, it's also the front plane, and then we can add a coincident mate. So those 2 planes are lined up. And there we have our small sub-assembly for stage 2. So it's a very simple assembly. You can now save this, and let's just call it something like Stage 2 Lego Helicopter 30465. So now in SolidWorks, I've got both of those assemblies open. I've got Stage 1 that we previously created, and I've got Stage 2 that we made just now. But actually Stage 2 in the instructions is a combination of this new smaller Stage 2 assembly and the original Stage 1. So we need to make them both into a new assembly. So what I'm going to do is press Ctrl and Tab to go to Stage 1. And then we can go to File, Make Assembly from Assembly. Again, this takes us to a new blank assembly. We can choose Stage 1 here on the left. And then let's press the green tick. And that should insert Stage 1 fixed to the origin of this new assembly. So it should be inserted something like this. And then if we double check looking at those default planes, it looks like they are correctly at the center of the model. We can now insert that second subassembly. So go to the Assembly tab, go to Insert Components, and let's choose Stage 2. So I'm going to move that to roughly the correct position. You might need to rotate it around using those rotation buttons. And then I'm just going to left click to position it in about the right place. So looking at the instructions, it looks like it should be roughly about there. We can then add some mates to actually properly lock it in place. We can see that this small grey axle needs to go through this 3rd hole on the right angle beam here. So let's zoom in a little bit. Let's choose that circular face on the grey axle. Also choose the circular face inside that hole on the beam, and let's add a concentric mate. So that moves that subassembly something like this, but we can still rotate it around. You wouldn't be able to do this in real life because the axles would clash against the beam. So first let's select the 2 flat edges of each of the beams and make those parallel. And then we just need to set the left-right position again. So we could add a coincident mate between those 2 faces of the beam that are next to each other. But actually there's probably a small gap in there just to allow the parts to move around. So what we'll do instead is we'll go down in the parts tree We'll expand the stage 2 assembly. We'll find the plane that goes down the middle of it. So for me, this is the front plane. And then we'll line that plane up with the middle of the new assembly. So we'll line it up with the right plane of the main assembly, and we'll make those coincident. So now that stage 2 subassembly is exactly in the middle of the assembly. And if we zoom in, we can see that there is actually indeed a small gap in between those two parts. So now the final thing that we need to do for this stage is add that small bushing in place. Let's go to the Assembly tab, go to Insert Components, and then select that bush part. If you don't see it there, you might just need to click Browse and find the bush part wherever it's saved on your computer. I'm going to rotate it around so it's in the correct orientation, and then just zoom in, and I'm going to select a circular edge from the axle, and also a circular edge from the bush, and I'm going to add a concentric mate. I'm going to lock the rotation, so if I go down to the bottom here and expand the mates, we can see that this concentric mate at the end is the latest one. If you've just got two circles which aren't filled in the middle, it means the rotation isn't locked. I'm going to right click on that mate and I'm going to choose lock rotation. And now if you look at the symbol, you can see that inner circle is filled in, so that indicates that the rotation is locked. So now the bush can't rotate and it can only go along that axle. So the final thing we need to do is just move it into the correct position. So let's choose this outside face of the beam and then this face of the bush, and then let's add a coincident mate. And it should look something like this, and all of our parts should now be in the correct position and everything should be fully defined. We can now save our assembly, and let's just call it something like main assembly Lego helicopter 30465. Well done for making that second stage. Already it's looking a lot more advanced than just a few videos ago. In the next section we're going to move on to stage 3, and we need to create 2 new parts, and then we need to add those to the new assembly.